And what we can see is that land-intensive sectors represent 49% of the overall emissions. That is agriculture, cattle raising, forestry, deforestation. On the other side, we can see that 19% of the overall emissions can be attributed to polluting energy sources. And at the same time, if we focus our attention to the left-hand side, we can see another pie chart that shows us the percentage of subsidies each sector receives from the government. And we can see that 51% of subsidies are destined to polluting energy sources. Additionally, in 2017, the government established a carbon tax equivalent to $10 per ton of CO2 emitted. However, this percent is it does no longer generate the proper incentives to shift toward renewable energies. So having said all this, the aim of this work is to shed some light over which is the optimal policy mix for Argentina in order to meet our environmental goals, whilst minimizing the negative or harmful reverberations in the economy. And for this reason, we have developed a dynamic computable general equilibrium model, which pays special interest to the energy and land sectors. And by doing so, we will be able to properly portray the impact of various scenarios at a sectorial level.
Well, now we are going to present the methodological aspects of this work. In the first place, we will state the CG model structure and highlight those aspects in the productive structure that allows us to analyze carbon mitigation public policy. Finally, information about the social accounting matrix SAM for Argentina will be presented. For this work, we represented Argentina as a small open economy, which means that it is small enough not to change international prices for goods. The productive sector of this model counts with 55 productive sectors. Additionally, 10 households were identified, divided by per capita income. Finally, firms demand four factors: labor, capital, which can be either mobile or specific, and land. Also, a rule for wages was added to labor market, so unemployment is present. Additionally, this CG model is recursive dynamic, and the dynamic baseline was constructed assuming that TFP growth rate is equal to 1.5%, a share to capital GDP equal to 2.43, and an active population growth rate of 1.09%. Let us now present our work's main contribution regarding to the modelization of energy consumption and land use. As we can see, a representative firm demands intermediate consumption, value added, and energy to produce. Intermediate consumption contains non-energetic input, and they are combined through a Leontief technology. Value added demand takes into account labor, capital, and for agroforestry sectors, land. Value added is combined through a Cobb-Douglas function. Now we will center our attention on the composition of the energetic package. As we can see, this pack is composed by electricity and non-electricity demand, which are combined with a lower substitution. In the non-electricity package, we can find liquid fuels and coal. On the other hand, electricity is modeled by combining with the Leontief technology the demand for generation and distribution. Note that all the technologies to produce electricity produce the same good. Thus, those technologies are perfect substitutes. The land stock is not fixed. It grows according to the deforestation sector activity level while reducing the stock of native forest and therefore the ability to capture carbon from the atmosphere. Thus, it is assumed that land supplies transform according to this scheme. Low elasticity of transformation, 0.1, is considered between forestry and agricultural uses. Later, a high elasticity of transformation, 0.2, is assumed between livestock, pasture, and agricultural crops. Finally, we can remark that households save resources and consume. Inside their consumption, we can find non-energetic and energetic demand, where the latter is responsible for domestic emissions. For this work, we compute three types of emissions: intermediate energy consumption, final energy consumption, and emissions coming from the productive process. Finally, to calibrate the model, a sum was required. For this work, we took as reference the sum described in Chisari et al. 2020, with 30 productive sectors. However, this matrix was modified to allow us to evaluate environmental policy. Finally, the current matrix was 56 productive sectors.
Okay, so let us now move on to describing the scenarios that we simulated. In the first place, we considered a reduction of subsidies to polluting energy sources at around 75%. Scenario 2 and 2A are carbon taxes. Scenario 2A considers a carbon tax equivalent to 13.68 US dollars per ton of CO2 emitted to all sectors in the economy. On the contrary, scenario 2B considers the same amount of carbon tax, but solely focused on land-intensive sectors. And finally, we consider a third scenario that combines the reduction in subsidies with the carbon tax specifically to land-intensive sectors. So what we see is that here all shocks were simulated from 2020, but the results are presented for 2030. So having said that, let us now present the results. In this slide, we can see a web diagram that shows the results for 2030 as variations from the baseline scenario for 5 main variables. The first, we have GHG emissions, then we have the amount of deforested land. And when it comes to the macroeconomic variables, we consider the gross domestic product, the unemployment rate, and social welfare. The blue line represents scenario 1. And what we can see is that even though it's very successful when it comes to reducing the overall level of emissions, it is not as good when it comes to reducing the amount of deforested land. When it comes to the macroeconomic variables, we see that this scenario brings about an increase in the unemployment rate and a decrease in both social welfare and GDP. Moving on to scenario 2A and 2B, what we can see is that these scenarios are not as successful when it comes to reducing emissions. However, they bring more promising results when it comes to deforested land. Additionally, what we can see is that implementing a sector-specific carbon tax reduces the harmful effects in the overall economy. Finally, the green line shows us scenario 3. And what we can see is that this scenario is very successful in both reducing emissions and reducing the amount of deforested land. And if we compare it to scenario 2A, this scenario doesn't bring about as many negative reverberations in the overall economy. So finally, let us present the results at the sectorial level. In this chart, we can see the different results for 2030 as variations again in relation of the baseline scenario. So let us now focus our attention to the third, fourth, and fifth column. What we can see is scenario 1 mainly reduces the amount of GHG emissions due to a composition effect. And we can see this because the gross output reduces in thermal electricity and increases in renewable electricity, which is represented in HNR electricity. On the contrary, if we consider scenarios 2A and 2B, what we can see is that the reduction in the overall level of emissions is mainly due to a scale effect. And again, the reduction is not as pronounced as in scenario 1. And finally, if we consider scenario 3, we can see that this scenario is able to generate this composition effect and generates the shift from polluting energy sources to renewable energy sources, whilst minimizing the scale effect due to the increase in prices. So having presented our results, let's now move on to our conclusions, where we can briefly comment our contributions of our work and possible extensions. Firstly, we believe that our model in itself is a contribution since we developed a dynamic CGE model for the Argentinian economy for a relatively recent year, which is 2017. We also produced a detailed characterization of both the energy sector and the land sector. And because of this model, we were able to determine that a mere carbon tax won't do the job when it comes to meeting the environmental goals. On the contrary, a more sophisticated policy package that includes a reduction in subsidies on the one side and a carbon tax for land-intensive sectors would be a more suitable alternative for Argentina. And this is mainly because of 2 reasons. On the first place, as we have seen in the previous slides, a reduction in subsidies motivates the shift towards renewable energies. And on the second place, the carbon taxation and land-intensive sectors may contribute to a reduction in deforested land. And finally, some possible extensions to our model would be reparametrization that would eventually improve the precision of our results. And finally, it will be very interesting when it comes to the modeling structure to integrate research and development. And in this way, we could see how different scenarios would motivate firms to invest in new technologies that would eventually reduce the amount of GHG emissions. So thank you very much. This was our work.
Great. Thanks very much, Maria and Martin. We will now move on to Felix. If you can put your PowerPoint up. Share screen.
I will. 1 second. There we go.
Okay, great.
Excellent. Then, good afternoon, good morning, or even good evening, wherever you're located. Thanks for joining. I'm presenting this work is preliminary results of my ongoing research. This is carried out with colleagues from different universities in Cuyo, Göttingen, even people from Cali in Costa Rica, and is mostly funded by the OIV, the International Organization of Vine and Wine. And we're going to be talking briefly about this project that seeks to assess the performance of grapevine producers in Western Argentina, as well as some valleys, wine valleys in Chilean region, and as well the southernmost valley of Bolivia, that is Tarija. In case there's any problem with the connection, please let me know. So, introduction, agricultural systems in mountain arid regions are very intensive in labor and other inputs. All these regions altogether have gone through 12 years of surface water scarcity. Together, jointly, Argentina and Chile, they produce almost 10% of world wine, while Argentina is still the first production in South America, 14.5 million hectoliters. 3/4 of it is consumed locally. This production was valued in 2017 in 240 million euros. On the other side, we have the Chilean economy that's nearly 13,000 million hectoliters, but only 10% of it is consumed locally, which tells us that this is a definitely export-oriented economy and wine region. That makes Chile the world-leading exporter from all the New World's country. And on the other hand, we do have the Tarija region, which is the southernmost region of Bolivia. And while it is a really small hectareage in terms of grapevine production, they are growing steadily, and they are aiming at increasing their hectareage by 7,000 hectares in the next 3-5 years. And they also have an evolving wine industry, which is also very well known by the spirituous industry, mostly named Singani. About the climate and water stress, let me just show you, we use the evaporative stress index that's come from the CHIRPS data. And basically what this index tells us is how well is the soil doing with respect to water content. So it's like water demand function, or demand minus supply, or supply minus demand, pretty much tell us how much water, what's the characteristic of the soil content, considering precipitation, irrigation applied, evapotranspiration, temperature, as well as soil moisture. You can see this graph on the left. There is the index located. If this index is positive, it tells that the soil or the crops are not going through stress. When this index is below 0, then all the agricultural production is mainly going through hydric stress. So on the x-axis, we do have the latitude. It started on -36, that's where the Chilean valleys are located. going up north, going through Mendoza, Famatina Valley, Salta region, Cafayate, arriving to Tarija, we get to see that despite these different fluctuancies, up north, there seems to be less problems related to water availability, which pretty much ensures that there's an evaporative stress heterogeneity in the southern Andes. We know for a fact that access to irrigation is a determinant due to hydroclimatic conditions. And we also do know that considering the enerological potential, the legacy and climate change or changes in climate conditions, there's a new pace for development of new wine areas. So the objectives of our study are pretty much provide insights on the tech gaps in the region and within valleys, how to cope with the effects of climate change. And for that, we look forward to build on the existing relationship between climate change and the effects of technological set for grapevine producers, and also to assess the technical performance through their characteristics, their decisions, and their existing technologies. So as I mentioned, we collected information in 6 wine valleys. There are 56 localities, primary data sources from Argentina and Bolivia, and secondary data from Chilean data sets. This was carried out in 2017 and 2019. These were production-oriented surveys. That means we focus on production output, also accounting for the technology use, and in particular managerial decisions. And the original assessment provided additional insights on technological selection. These are some big pictures of the fieldwork. From the top left, we can see the Primera Zona de Valley from Mendoza region. Then below, we see a little bit of Cafayate region. Then in the top, we see Famatina Valley, that is in La Rioja. And here are some collaborators assisting with the surveys. And here on the right, we see the effect, the production in Tarija. The production system in Tarija is very heterogeneous, and I would say most likely to be polarized, since we do have really small community stakeholders, that they were legacy lands, that they start to be divided among families. So we have producers around taking like 1 or 2 hectares or less, and then we have extensive vineyards with more than 100 hectares. Some of the variables that we use or assess are the traditional variables for production function. We did carry out a Cobb-Douglas, so we included capital services, land, agrochemicals, water, that is a stated value of irrigated per producer. We did the analysis at the plot level, and then another dummy variables, and the managerial variables. Overall, we consider irrigation system, whether they use technology, they are associated to any sort of affiliations, and so on. Some of the yields showed some bimodal distribution, so we focused to do, we acknowledge the mean differences in terms of means with respect to the technology they use for irrigation. So from the whole sample, which is nearly 1400s, we divided those with a particular irrigation technology, focusing in drip irrigation, and furrow or another technology for irrigation. We see some, as I mentioned, some statistically differentiated, different means in terms of yield and plot size. And these are just some of the values per cluster at the plot level. We ended up using the splitting in each valley had 2 groups of technology adoption, and that implied 10 total clusters for development. And these are the variables of vineyard, the complete vineyard at the plot, and these are the variables, mean scale variables used at the production function. As here is noted, Mendoza used mean scale variables. So we moved forward into the meta frontier to analyze some of the results. Here what we did is we employed the meta frontier, since it is a performance measure with respect to an evolving frontier. So we're practically saying we respected the technology performance, or we respected the technology endowment of each cluster. And through this methodology, it facilitates the comparison across vineyards with different structure, location, and technology. Basically, we did study the output meta-technology ratio, and then the multiplication with the residual output technology estimation, we obtain the overall performance. We're going to be focused on the ROTE indicator, which says, with the given technology, how are they doing? So this is basically an explanation of the methodology, and the distance from the, will be the distance from the group frontier or cluster frontier to the meta frontiers that will tell us about the technology gap. But we are focusing on this side. We are trying to explain how are they doing with respect to the selected technology. So we do have this, basically the explanations of the methodologies. The OMR is the given choice of the technological set. And we said choice between quotes because sometimes, and according to a limitation of this agricultural systems, there could be financial constraints, and there could be legacy constraints, or numerous sort of alternatives that why these people cannot obtain the best technology for irrigation. And once they have their technological set, the ROT indicator or the residual output indicator tells us how good are they using it. And the multiplication gives us the overall performance. These are the results of the estimation. And as I mentioned, we will be focusing on the ROTE. So pretty much they tell us that overall, we see some big groups here on the Chilean vineyard systems, followed by Famatina and Mendoza. But I have summarized that all these numbers in a, so to speak, a more simple explanation. So we have the three components of the OMR, the best technological set according to the restriction and information we collected. We have three big groups. The first choice set were carried out by Chilean farmers, which is the Maule and Colchagua Wine Valley, followed by Mendoza region. Then we continue to go up north with Famatina, Cafayate, and Tarija Technified agricultural producers. And last were the smallholders from Tarija. How they use this technology? Well, pretty much they were the best using technology group, or the best users of the selected method technology are Chilean farmers, the Mendocinian vineyards, and the Famatina technological farmers, followed by Cafayate and the technical farmers, or most technical farmers in Tarija. And we see some interesting performance gaps with respect to the Tarija smallholders. In terms of the overall performance, tells us that Chilean and Mendocinian wine valleys are performing fairly okay. In the second group, we have Famatina and Cafayate technological farmers, and the remaining group in the third area. This is just to put in terms of graph what we just described. So as you can see, the x-axis on the bottom, as closer as you go to the right, that means that you're performing better with the respect selected method technology or technological choice. We see some pretty good performance of Chilean drip farmers, followed by the Chilean furrow irrigation, those farmers that use furrow irrigation systems, followed by Famatina, and then Mendocinian wine vineyards. And we see some interesting or potential gains in performance for Tarija smallholders, as well as Cafayate smallholders. So basically, the Chileans have picked their technology wisely, and they are using it accordingly. Winemakers in Mendoza can still improve their performance, and we see some relatively good performance for those farmers that already have low technology in terms of water management. So translating, this means that those farmers that they have limitations for irrigation, they're already improving the behavior of the use of their technology. That doesn't mean they're performing the best in their industry, but it means that they are adapting to the changes in the climate. Also, another effects are that technified vineyards may also focus on enological potential rather than yield, which undermines the yield because they want more sugar content or another characteristics for performance. And then, as mentioned, overall, Northern valleys, talking about Cafayate and Tarija, they can still improve their management with the existing technology. Last, this is just a histogram of the residual output technology performance. As you could see already on the previous graph, then the performance from Chilean drip farmers were outperforming some of the other clusters. And we took that out of this graph, and we can see overall how the farrow farmers and the Mendocino viticulture are a little bit more right skewed. With respect to the water use, let me recall that the Mendocinian viticulturists and winemakers, their mean scale variables, they roughly use around 10,000 cubic meters per hectare, and that's a common average. And this means the effectively applied water. So if some farmers for instance, in Tarija small farmers, they're using a really old technology for irrigate their crops, they'd probably be using 50% more of water. So this is effectively applied water to the crop according to their irrigation system. And this is a plot showing on the y-axis the evaporative stress index, and then on the x-axis the residual output technology. Basically reaffirms some of the comments that I just did, that those farmers that suffer evaporative stress in the bottom right, they are better performing with the existing technology. And this is just some of the calculation of the ongoing work. It's a simple OLS that we are trying to see what are the relationships between which region they come from, how they use their other of the zeta variables, how are they affecting the performance, or how are they affecting the evaporative stress index.
Okay, Felix, could you, good conclusion. That's what I'm looking for.
Great. Sorry it took it so long. So basically we analyzed 56 localities from 3 countries. The residual output performance of small and medium vineyards in Argentina are focusing with the water resources. We also explain susceptibility by managerial decisions and heterogeneous technologies. And we see that Chileans and farmers or vineyards from Mendoza have better picked out their technology. That means that they have fewer constraints to deal with the scarcity. Parcels from Famatina, they have relatively good performance, scoring on average 80% of the overall frontier. And unfortunately, we see a huge gap or a greater gap for the Tarija farmers, the smallholders. Some of the ongoing work, which we expect to come out soon, it will be homogenizing the pest information. We got a lot of pest information, but we were unable to sort of systematize it for the damage function. And then other issue will be the stakeholder behaviors towards variety adoption, and in particular, the spatial and hierarchical models. Couldn't be said less. Just to closure, I acknowledge the funding from the OIB for this project, as well as all the farmer institutions, organizations from the country that have assisted, or different countries that have assisted us in this ongoing work. So thank you very much. I'm open for questions.
Okay, I think we're gonna, as I mentioned, hold the questions till all the presentations have been completed. Excuse me. But if you want, please, feel free to write down your questions to the speakers right now, so you don't forget. But we will have time at the end for more questions. So thanks, Felix.
My pleasure.
Now, our next speaker is supposed to be Jorge Gabriel Paz. Are you there, Jorge? Speaking about cotton oil. Going once, going twice. Okay. So if he shows up, we'll listen to him a little later. And then our next speaker is Claudio. Excuse me. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and your topic.
Let me show my screen and we'll start from there.
Perfect. Yep.
Can you see the screen now?
Yes, it's not the full screen
Okay.
yet. There, perfect.
Now it should be full.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. My name is Claudio Dunan. I'm going to present some work that we did together with the University of SEMA and INTA regarding the willingness to pay and the economic value of technology HB4 in soybeans in Argentina. I am the director of strategy of Bioceres, and I'm also one of the coordinators of the bio-based business of the University of Buenos Aires. But this particular presentation is going to be around the technology for drought tolerance in soybeans in Argentina. Let me tell you very briefly about Bioceres. Bioceres is an Argentine company that was founded back in 2001. The idea was to develop biotechnology for the needs of our farmers in Argentina. Originally, we were 23 founders. Today, we are more than 300 shareholders, presence in over 25 countries, $160 million turnover. And we own a company, 80% of a company that is public in the New York Stock Exchange for about 2 years. We focus on developing technologies and products for increasing crop yields, and the second area of the company is to develop technologies for transforming feedstocks, mostly from forestry, agriculture, pastures, even municipally waste feedstocks into value-added products. So let me start saying that our research is very interesting from the viewpoint that if we consider that the soybean production in the world is highly dependent, has been highly dependent on the crop area, increasing the crop area. And for example, in the last 20 years, basically everything that has happened this century, the production moved from about 160 million tons to over 350 million tons, but 75% of that production came from increasing in the area and only 25% increase in yields. And that is related a lot to the deforestation that has been taking place in Brazil and in many areas of Argentina. And that has a very high impact in the environment. The FAO has reached the estimation that the crop production in terms of environmental costs is over 1.15 trillion. That is a lot of zeros, and it's actually 170% of the created value of the crop production. If we move to the situation in Argentina, is even more dependent on the increasing area. Argentina increased the production of soybeans from 20 million tons to about 55 million tons, and 87% of that came from increasing the crop area. So we know that this is not very sustainable. So one of the concepts that is very helpful in understanding the way forward is, for our understanding, is that sustainable intensification of agriculture is an interesting concept, because really says that crop production will have to come from increasing yields rather than increasing areas, with technologies that have a lower impact on the environment. for example, genetic resources, biological control, biological nutrition, precision ag, management of the microbiome. So all those technologies have proved to have a lower impact than traditional technologies in crop production, and altogether can be a move, a way forward to reduce the dependency on crop production in the area of crop production and moving more into productivity yields. And another concept that is very important to understand the way forward is gap analysis. Gap analysis was initially introduced by Van Nittersum and co-workers back in 2013, and really refers to understand what is the relationship with between the potential yield that a given environment agroecosystem can have for a given crop and the yield that is actually being obtained by farmers. There are two potential yields that had to be considered. One of them is the potential yields in areas where irrigation is common, which is then related to solar radiation, temperature, CO2 concentration. But for rain-fed areas, like most of the Argentinian areas, the most interesting potential yield is the water-limited potential yield. And that is already taking consideration of what happens with water and the dynamics of water with the precipitation, temperature, soil properties, and so on. So when we look at this, why is this concept so important? Yield gap between what the farmers are obtaining and the potential that they can obtain. And that will help us to focus on areas where we can be more productive in increasing yields, identify what are the key limiting factors of that production, prioritize research and development efforts, and evaluate the impact of climate change of the production of crops. And if we go into this, in the right-hand side of the slide, we can say that we can see here that we have what is called the actual yield, or the farmer average yield, the yield potential, which in this case, as I say, for Argentina, is the water limited yield potential. So the difference between these two is the yield gap. Sorry, here is in Spanish, but here is the yield. So in Argentina, for example, the yield gap average yield gap in soybean is 32%. And that is a result that we have a potential yield of 6.2, a water limited yield of 3.9 tons per hectare, and an average of 2.7 tons per hectare actual yield of what the farmers get. One more concept that is very important is the exploitable yield or attainable yield, which is considered about 80% of the potential yield, because farmers cannot continue increasing the use of technology because at a given point in time, they will reach a roof, and then it's considered that they can attain about 80% of the potential yield. That exploitable yield in Argentina for the soybeans in Argentina is 3.1. So this theoretical framework is very important to analyze what we have at home. Here you have different areas of soybean. The large, darker green areas are the areas with the higher production. And when we move away from these areas to what we call more marginal or peripheric areas, the yield goes down. And in this graphic, in this table, we can see the two key areas of soybean productions, like Marcos Juarez, which is one of the counties in this area, and Rio Cuarto, one of the counties that is more in these more marginal areas, have very different characteristics. Marcos Juarez has a potential yield limited by water of about 4.2 tons per hectare, while Rio Cuarto has a potential yield of 5.1. So although the actual yield is much lower in Rio Cuarto, the potential is higher. And the yield gap is much higher in Rio Cuarto. And this is related to two main things. One of them is the volatility of the climate. so especially precipitation. And the second is the incorporation of technology. These areas where the volatility of precipitation is high, farmers tend to apply less technology, and then there is a synergetic effect in this case to go down, which is we have higher risk, downside risk, then we use less technology, our yield gap is higher. HB4 is a technology that confers drought tolerance or tolerance to water stress, to water deficit. It has been discovered in sunflower by researchers from CONICET, the Dr. Raquel Chan, back in late in the 1990s. She found out in Arabidopsis that all those, the plants with the technology, the transcription factor HB4, had a higher water tolerance than those that didn't have it. Bioceres licensed that technology back in 2003, and we've been developing that technology in the fields, getting all the regulatory affairs from 2010 to the present. So we've been developing this technology in soybeans for about 17 years. The technology, this is a paper has been published recently. HB4 technology produces higher yields under water stress, mostly related to two aspects: a larger number of seeds, of grains, and a higher water use efficiency. And the most interesting thing is that the mode of action of HB4, so the mechanism of action, is not related to stomach closure, because that has been shown that although can increase the tolerance to drought, it will reduce yields, because definitely the plant, when it closes the stomachs, reduces the growth and finally affects the yields. In the case of HB4, the transcription factors, the group of genes that confer this tolerance, are related to a hormonal response, mostly to the sensitivity of ethylene. So the plant doesn't sense the presence of the drought at early stages and continues growing. And then when the rain comes back, when the humidity is back, then has an advantage in growth. And this that was initially we saw in the lab. We saw it in the field in about already 9 years of field trials in the US and Argentina. So what I will show some results to estimate the value of HB4 technology at the country and farmer level. And then another study that we performed to estimate the willingness to pay for that technology that the soybean farmer in Argentina will have. So this is what we found in the field. So the efficacy of HB4 goes down when the production of the site increases, but as I mentioned before, there is no yield penalty. So this is very important because HB4 can act as a risk reduction factor. When we use this equation in the different soybean areas of Argentina, different counties, we'll find that the value added of the technology is larger in all the marginal areas and not so large in the central areas where the production, the actual production is very high, where as I said before, the yield gap is very small. When we move away from the central areas of productions to areas more marginal with higher yield gaps for above 20%, then the added value of the technology, the efficacy and the added value of the technology increases. So in average for the country, there is about a 7%, 8% yield increase for the whole country. If we consider an average of 19 million hectares in Argentina, if every area, all the area of Argentina would adopt HB4, we would have $1.2 billion more worth of soybeans. Since that is not the case, because the HB4 technology has a price, and the optimum price for the company to commercialize the technology yields a 75% adoption. These areas probably will have a much lower adoption, then the increase in the production of soybeans will reach about $1 billion. When we relate this to the yield gap, what we saw is that the yield gap is the efficacy of HB4 is linearly related to the yield gap. So the higher the yield gap, the higher the efficiency of HB4. So if we take an average, as I mentioned before, of an attainable yield of 3.1 tons, minus the actual yield that we get average of in the country, we have a gap of 0.4 tons to be obtained without per hectare. And if we consider 19 million hectares, Argentina could increase 7.5 million tons without increasing the area of the crop. HB4 can add to this or can reduce this gap of 0.4 tons to 0.2 tons. So actually, HB4 has the capacity to reduce the yield, the attainable yield gap in 50%. So if we look at this very simple diagram, HB4 increases yields under drought or water deficit condition. It reduces the downside risk. This will stimulate the use also of technology, and with that, reduces the yield gap. So what is the perception that the farmer has for this technology? Well, we perform a study of willingness to pay using a choice analysis, choice experiment that simulate the purchase of a 14-kilo soybean bag with different attributes. In the choice experiment, the farmers were exposed to different combinations of technologies. For example, this combination is actually these three technologies and with different prices. Drought tolerance is the HB4 average for the marginal areas, 10% yield increase, control of resistant weeds. HB4 also has, besides the drought tolerance, has confers the crop resistance to ammonium glufosinate, which is a very useful herbicide to control glyphosate-resistant weeds. And in Argentina, the seed treatment with biological nutrition products is very widely adopted. And so we put also as a third attribute the seed treatment, the professional seed treatment. So the farmer will buy a whole bag of seeds that will have this technology, a combination of these three technologies. And it will be compared to the technology that has with a bag of soybeans that have no other technologies. We did the survey with 200 farmers, and we ended up with 800 questionnaires. We took some other data from the farmers, the planted area, the average expected yield, sex, education, location in the province and county. Then we added some other other variables like what was the county average yield, what was the water limited yield, and then we calculated the yield gap. This is a sample of the choice card that the farmer was receiving. So he has three options for every choice card with a combination of the technologies. For example, this particular card, which is not more than an example, has drought tolerance. These first two options doesn't have it. This is let's say the generic option at $30 per bag. The option 2 had the resistant control of resistant weeds and professional seed treatment, and the third one had only drought tolerance, and these different prices. So every one of these choice cards was given to the farmer, and the farmer has to choose only one of these options. So we ended up, as I said before, with 800 of these questionnaires. And based on regression analysis, this is a regression model where this is the coefficient for drought tolerance, the coefficient for control of resistant weeds, coefficient for professional seed treatment, all of them positive, as you can say, and negative, obviously, because the price has also his coefficient, but is negative. So the farmer value in a positive way these technologies, and obviously, the higher the price, the value or the let's say the utility function. Sorry about that. So what was the result? Average for all these technologies was $19.6 per bag for drought tolerance, $17.5 per bag for control of resistant weeds, $5.2 per bag for professional seed treatment. The interesting thing is that when we separated farmers in the areas with a higher, lower yield gap, lower than 20% or higher than 20%, farmers in the areas with higher yield gaps were willing to pay a higher price for the technology. So this is a confirmation that really the farmer perceives that the opportunity to achieve higher yields is very related to environmental issues and value this technology in a very interesting way. When we combine all technologies, so the efficacy to drought tolerance and the resistance to glufosinate to control resistant weeds, we ended up with 4 different areas based on the value added of this technology. In the blue areas, we have yield gaps larger than 20% and resistant weeds larger than 25% incidence. So this is the areas where our technology has the higher value. The orange areas is where the yield gap is larger than 20%, but there are no resistant weeds. The purple areas, we have already yield gaps lower than 20%, but a high presence of resistant weed. And the light yellow areas is where we don't have much value added because the yield gaps is lower than 20% and the resistant weed presence is also lower than 25%. So just to summarize, the regulatory situation of this technology has been already approved in Argentina and Brazil and Paraguay and the US. And we are waiting for the approval in China for feed and food to start the commercialization of this technology. Thank you so much for listening. If there are questions, I will answer later on.
Great. Thanks, Claudio. I've got a whole bunch of questions, but I'll wait for till the end on this. Let's see. Our next speaker is Andrew. Let's see, Andrew Tomes, and his co-author is Lee Anderson, and it's policy responses to the decline in nutritional quality of crops due to climate change. Andrew?
Hello, I'm just going to get set up real quick.
Okay, thanks.
Alrighty, hi everyone, my name is Andrew Toms. I'm a graduate student at the Evans School Policy Analysis and Research Group at the University of Washington in Seattle, Washington. And I am here to present on policy responses to crop decline and nutrient quality in response to increasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So climate change is contributing to rising carbon dioxide levels and warming temperatures globally, while higher carbon dioxide concentrations and warmer temperatures present the possibility of gains for agriculture by promoting photosynthetic carbon fixation. These benefits come at a cost. Recent carbon enrichment studies indicate potential threats to our protein supply, including in staple crops such as wheat, barley, oats, and potatoes, as well as most grasses, which serve as forage for livestock. So plants grown in elevated carbon dioxide environments contain more carbohydrates, but lower densities or contents of protein, iron, zinc, and other micronutrients. Diets high in carbohydrate-rich grains can lead to a combination of undernutrition by supplying too few micronutrients, as well as overnutrition in the form of the significant caloric surpluses consumed in order to meet other nutritional requirements. So this situation leads to what's termed the double burden of malnutrition. This is a map just showing relative risks of this double burden globally, produced by the Institute for Health Metrics at University of Washington. So I just want to pay attention to the Southern Africa, South America, and Northern Africa regions as we examine risks on the next slide here. So despite advances in increasing crop nutrition content, carbon dioxide and increased temperatures are projected to dampen these advances significantly, especially in areas where the double burden is already high. So regardless of yield gains in these areas, the nutritional quality just might not be there. So if we look at conventional or commonly adopted responses to declining or low nutritional quality in foods, we can look at dietary diversity, oral nutritional supplements, or post-harvest fortification. Dietary diversity can be effective, but it's the most complex and difficult to implement, especially since it requires significant behavioral change on the part of the consumers, as well as the difficulty in introducing and getting new crops off the ground in some rural areas. Oral nutritional supplements can be used to target specific deficiencies in specific populations, but they require substantial investment and, again, behavioral change from consumers. And in this case, compliance is not guaranteed. Finally, post-harvest fortification adds additional nutrition directly to processed foods, which removes the behavioral drawbacks present in oral supplements, but it may not deliver these nutrients effectively. The bioavailability of these nutrients is relatively low. So the solution that we're proposing here is emphasizing biofortification, or improving nutritional quality of crops through breeding, modification, or manipulation of the environment, which promises to be more effective than these more conventional approaches. There are three potential biofortification options: agronomic management, such as fertilizing the soil, conventional selective breeding, and genetic modification. While agronomic management increases soil nutrient content, it has the potential to decrease yields. And while genetically modified organisms are a cost-effective option, there's uncertainty and perceived risk about the use of such technologies that limits investments and opportunity. Conventional breeding does present some challenges. For example, the desired trait may not be present in the target crop. Each option presents its own set of pros and cons, but conventional breeding is highly successful and faces the lowest barrier to entry. Lastly, policy changes can encourage and support a shift in production towards crops with greater tolerance to temperature variations and carbon dioxide concentrations. While biofortification presents a viable path to reducing the impact of climate change on nutrition, there are several areas where additional research is needed. One is plant non-essential minerals. Plants are agnostic to several of the micronutrients humans need from them. This means that often a nutrient's presence in crops is more a coincidence caused by soil composition rather than design. Currently, there's substantial data on carbon dioxide's effect on nutrients needed by plants like nitrogen or carbon, But due to lack of research interest, there's little to no literature examining the effect of carbon dioxide and climate change on micronutrients found in but not needed by plants. So we propose that we address this research gap with a multidisciplinary approach in order to better understand the role of plant non-essential mineral accumulation and how the process is affected by carbon dioxide levels. Some field-based research paths include using data and seed from long-term agronomic trials or conducting manipulative agronomic experiment with soils and fertilizers, as is already done for these more intensively studied nutrients. Another opportunity is to leverage natural variability within a single crop, identifying if a specific cultivar is more or less resistant in terms of other nutrient accumulation to rising carbon dioxide levels. For such studies, it would be necessary to ensure a large sample size. There have also been innovations in visualizing and screening seed quality to accelerate selection for desired characteristics, which could be leveraged towards these other experimental approaches. Finally, there's value in information analysis, such as clarifying how much or little we know and describing the value of additional information, such as the effect of rising carbon dioxide on lithium, for example. Lastly, better models and model design will allow researchers to integrate nutrient deficiencies into the next generation of agricultural models and assess nutritional response to indirect effects of carbon dioxide. So in conclusion, the rising carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere present a multifaceted challenge for maintaining crop quality, and kind of the division among different areas of research is leaving some areas that could be more intensively studied in order to better prepare us for these changes before they become even more significantly challenging to vulnerable populations. So we already know a route to some cost-effective intervention, but understanding which routes are best for which crops is important, as well as crafting the policy landscape to more fully support the development options that are best. Alrighty, thank you very much for your time today.
Okay, great. Thanks, Andrew. Let's see. So I think we've had all of the presentations by people that are here. So now we can open up the floor to questions. Let me check questions that we have. Okay, the questions have primarily been answered, it looks like, on the Q&A section. So are there questions either from the panels of each other, or do we have questions by the audience? You can either, I guess you can just write those in, or let's see. Yes, I guess the thing to do is write them in. We have a few too many people for to have it all live to begin with. So questions, comments? Okay, well, let me start by a few of my questions, or one at a time. So, for Claudio, I was wondering what the characteristics of drought are in Argentina. I mean, are these HB4 soybeans, are they set up to you know, survive I don't know, 30% drop in moisture, or are they set up for a specific crisis or something like that? How do they, what kind of conditions do they work best in?
Well, thanks for the question, Carl. I mean, it's not that you can, the HB4 will make a miracle in terms of drought.
Right.
But it's so common to have water stress during the soybean or wheat, because we have the technology also in wheat during the soybean cycle, and in that case is where perform the most, where you have multiple stresses along the cycle, especially during the reproductive stage of the crop. Now we have some examples of yield increases in very intense droughts, like we had back in 2018 in Argentina. Even the largest yield increase that we obtained was in one of the most productive areas. It's called Pergamino, which is like the central areas of production in Argentina, and we obtained in field conditions 28%, and this has been published, 28% yield increase. Now, that is a very extreme example, because really the yield, we lost billions of dollars for the drought in Argentina in 2018. But in general, I would say that when you have yield reductions that will go between 10 and 20% is where you will get the best results with HB4.
And those kind of conditions are
in the marginal areas,
or every 3 years, or every 5 years, or
depends on the area. Where we have the smaller yield gaps, that happens probably 20% yield reductions, one every 10 years. And when we go west of that area, it will happen 3 times out of 10.
Because one of the challenges, I think, for the drought tolerant corn in the U.S. has been, figuring out exactly where to put that in, and and what kind of combinations with other traits and things like that. Because farmers are not all that keen on just buying drought tolerance in most places in the U.S. It's been sold more as a way to save water in irrigated areas, perhaps, than it has been for just straight drought tolerance.
Yeah, I mean the drought tolerant corn is a very specific example, and what the main difference, I think, in all these, well, not all these, because really truly there is only one trait in terms of the that goes to drought tolerance, and this is it, or the corn in the US. The difference is that we don't have a yield penalty when there is no water stress, because these transcription factors only activate if there is stress. So that is quite different from what happens in the drought tolerant, the drought guard Bayer corn, that is more related to stomach closure. So really, you have an issue there, that when you don't have the yield stress, the water stress, then you lose yield. So the way that we are trying to position this technology is, as I mentioned, is a risk reduction technology that will act when you need it. In certain areas, you will get the need of the technology more often, in other areas less often. But by reducing the downside risk, then you will be able to use more technology. Because one of the things that has been published in several places around the world is that farmers, because of the downside risk, they use less technology that that is available, and during the wet years, the yield gaps are larger than in the dry years.
Yeah. Okay, great. We have a question for Andrew. It's from Maria Ramos. I know the focus of your research is on supply side mainly, but how do you address nutrition on the consumption side? I think it would be useful to couple supply with demand side with microdata to measure the impact in terms of micronutrient intakes by household members. Do you plan to do something similar, and also to measure diet diversity at the household level?
Yeah, so I might need to clarify the question a little bit, but what we are doing is compiling statistics from national surveys like the LSMS, and using that to do dietary diversity scores and intake. But kind of the goal with a biofortification approach is to identify what people are already eating and making that better for them, so that we're minimizing the effects of having to adapt to growing or consuming new crops, and minimizing the amount of behavioral change necessary to achieve a healthier diet there.
See, other questions? Let me ask Felix a couple of questions that I had about his work. Felix, you seem to have the frontiers and the production functions and all that they're based on the quantity of grapes produced. Am I getting that right? I mean, quantity doesn't really tell you much in wine grapes. In other words, my very brief trip to Mendoza talked about some of these, what is it, Criollas varieties or something. I can't remember the name of it now, where, you know, the traditional ones that the farmers use for, you know, I don't know, I guess they make some wine out of it, bulk wine, things like that, but that can get like, I don't know, 20 tons per hectare or something like that. And whereas a normal wine grape will be doing 1 ton. How do you account for these quality differences? Is that considered? Maybe I missed it in your presentation, I'm not sure.
No, you didn't miss it. Thanks for the question. It goes a similar line of what Maria Ramos asked.
Yeah.
It is true that we control for yields. I mean, that's the output variable that we're measuring. It is also true that normal output or average output for a good quality wine will be between 8 and 10 tons per hectare.
Yeah,
and in order to distinguish let's say, the characteristics or the potential of grapevine production, this approach of the meta frontiers seems to be suitable at this point, since technology adopters vineyards as it stands in Mendoza or several regions that were visited, technology adoption for water irrigation are those vineyards that they aim at higher quality wines. So they're winemakers and not only wine grape producers. They elaborate their own wine and they seek better characteristics on the quality. One of the other alternatives and variables that we asked for, but we didn't got full answer, it will be the price paid or the agreed price to be paid for the grapes, because some of them sell to greater vineyards. Some of them were really happy to give us the information, some others were very reluctant. And those will be, in case we do have the output price, then it's easier to move into a profitability frontier or just another perspective of, let's say, financial income or economic profitability. The other aspect, it will be also control for some quality handcrafts that are being made at the product. And that really could drive us to some hopefully tangible results to differentiate the quality and those that focus on only yield.
Mm-hmm. We have David Zilberman, our moderator, has returned. Yes, David, did you have a wonderful meeting to get Berkeley University straightened out from its many problems?
Oh yes, I'll tell you later on. It actually was much more interesting than that. But
okay, thanks. Let's see. So, looking for other questions. I guess let me ask Andrew about how big and how fast are these quality changes taking place in the crops you're looking at? I mean, is it likely that the nutrients in wheat are going to be declining significantly over the next 10 years, is it? Or does it go fast when the heat goes up or the stress goes up? How does it work, do you know?
Yeah, so I'd have to pull up the paper to give you some specific numbers, but in general, we're already seeing declining nutrient quality as a result of several factors, climate change among them. Even removing elevated carbon dioxide from the equation entirely, things like stress events can reduce the nutritional quality as well as the physical yield. So even under ideal circumstances, maybe your physical yield isn't necessarily going down, but because the plant is fixing carbon at a higher rate, it's choosing to accumulate energy storage compounds like starch or oil instead of producing other like functional things like proteins or accumulating minerals because it doesn't need them as much. Its nutrient use efficiency is going up. Which is great for the plant, but as far as like micronutrient accumulation goes, just the concentration of the micronutrients is dropping in the plant, even if the actual accumulation of the crop isn't necessarily decreasing. And we are already seeing that happen.
Okay. Any questions for others in the in the groups? Oh, here, Lee is Andrew's co-author is weighing in that declines of. Oops, I missed it already. It's in the chat. Yeah, declines of 5 to 10%. in iron, zinc, and protein, and 30% in B vitamins in some experiments. It's not, the time lapse is unknown right now. Okay, thanks, Lee. Okay, other questions or comments?
Yeah. I had a question, Carl, if I may.
Sure.
For Maria and Juan, in your model for the land expansion, could you talk a little bit about that parameter, how you guys derived it, what was the logic behind it? Yeah, any other comments you might have about it?
Well, for modeling the land use, we assume a rule for the moving stock of land. So the land that the activity level for forestry sector demands land, so it makes them cut forest and consume native forest. So that consumption becomes available land in the next period. It's like a rule for the movement of land of the land stock.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I'll keep asking my questions. I'm going to go back to you, Claudio, and Bioceres. I've always been intrigued by that organization. If I understand it correctly, it basically began as more or less a co-op of large farmers. Is that correct? And that And now it's sort of evolved into this company that's listed on the stock exchange in the U.S. But
well, you could say that had some certain components of the co-op, because when we started back in 2001, we were 23 initial shareholders. We reached a number of 320. And during that period of time, basically the finance of the company was by family and friends. So the increasing number of shareholders who were buying different shares at different values along the years. That changed a little bit back about 5 years ago when we started to take some, what do you call this, large investors, even from outside the US. And finally, we decided to take the company public, and we ended up listing the company in the New York Stock Exchange, owning 80% of that. And the other thing that changed quite a bit was the scope, because what we initially was a company that was going to develop biotechnology for Argentinian needs, ended up being a much more wider view of a biology-based company. We purchased an Argentinian company about 4 years ago in the inoculant business, soybean inoculant, Rhizobacter, yeah. So we own that company, 80% of that company. We have a seed company that also goes along it's also part of the company that listed in the New York Stock Exchange. Then we have two joint ventures, one with Arcadia Biosciences, a company from Davis, California. They are a biotech company, and we created what is called Verdeca. The company has developed and deregulate transgenic soybeans around the world. And the other JV is with a French company, and for wheat, it's called Florimond-Desprez, and we have a JV that develops germplasm and transgenic wheat for Latin America.
And
so all those.
Do you have a major research program of your own, or are you sort of buying technology?
What we do is we take research or technology at the very early stages. I would say proof of concept, as I show for the soybean, for the HB4 technology. We take it at the stage of Arabidopsis responses, and we develop the whole thing. So we transform wheat, we transform alfalfa, soybeans. We develop the crop varieties. We did the whole regulatory process in the different countries, as I mentioned, Brazil, the US, Paraguay. Now we are finishing in China. So we have all those technology capabilities, and the ones that we don't have them, we try to acquire with a partner like Arcadia in the case of soybeans, and Florimond-Desprez in the case of wheat. And we do get the basic science from universities and research institute. As I say, the most HB4 is coming from CONICET. We have some presenters today that are also from CONICET. So we license the technology, and the technology belongs to CONICET. Actually, part of that belongs to the researchers. And the way that we perceive ourselves is just trying to move the knowledge from the basic knowledge to the technology product in the field, in the market. That is a little bit of our philosophy.
Interesting, great.
So we expect to launch soybean technology next year. And we are right now going through the hardest part of the process with the transgenic wheat, because you probably know that this will be the first transgenic wheat in the market.
Yeah.
So we are facing a lot of issues there.
No doubt.
Who is buying your transgenic wheat? Where do you think you can sell it? Because I know that at least in the Canadian and some of the American don't want to see it. The growers.
Yeah, the way we see it is that what we're doing now is we have a conditional approval in wheat with Brazil. Brazil is the largest market for Argentinian wheat. So we cannot commercialize the wheat in any way unless the Brazilian authorities approve the transgenic wheat for consumption. In the meantime, we are only increasing our stock of seeds just in case we get the approval. If we get the approval, and this is a big if we get the approval, then what we are going to do is to continue implementing the identity preserve program of a niche product where we are getting into the market the wheat that we believe has a lower environmental impact because of the water use efficiency, carbon footprint, and the whole package that we have developed. So that will be a niche production lower than 100,000 hectares per year, and we will see if the market continues to reject transgenic wheat. We believe that that might change after a couple of years, so we'll see. And if it doesn't happen, well, it was worth a try.
I believe it will change drastically.
It will, sorry?
Well, the consumer would love it. The wheat grower may not, but the consumer will love it.
Well, we'll see what happens. As you know, when you are in the innovation side of the equation, you have to take these risks. I mean, we have a very compelling offer with the transgenic wheat. Really is a very disruptive technology. Increases really the tolerance to water stress. It allows you to control problematic weeds, reduces the increases the water use efficiency of the crop. So we'll see. The good thing today is that we can do traceability of the whole thing, identity preservation from farm to fork, and that's what we're doing with our wheat.
Just ask, I guess we still have a little time, yes. Felix, I'm curious about some things that I saw in my brief visit to Mendoza. One of the problems that I was hearing about from some of the growers was this problem of the sort of boom in oil production, which was then polluting the subsystem of water, and as I guess it was sort of compounding with the drought and water shortage. So farmers were having to drill deeper down, and then I guess sometimes they could go right through the polluted segment into lower levels or something. Can you is that just a specific problem in Mendoza, or is that a problem in some of your other areas you dealt with?
That it is a problem, but as far as I understand, it has been further ameliorated, the effects. That is actually the research area that in Mendoza that I worked in, and the problem initiated 20 years ago, or it was developed 20 years ago, where that appeared to be leaking in the petrochemical complex. So on the groundwater that reached the area where the water was being pumped for irrigate the crops. That created this line diffusion, and that problem was being carried out and taken as seriously as it could by the authorities. At the moment, since there are many judicial trials with respect to this effect, some of the information is strictly confidential and I haven't got access to it, but the institution had been going and affirmed that the problem has been ameliorated and the aquifer is retaking the back shape or retaking the healthy status from that moment to 20 years ago. So there's still diffusion of the pollution, but the levels are relatively lower, and that's that's been taken seriously by the authorities. We addressed that issue and that might sound like a promotion, but we addressed the salinity effects through a distance function approach, and we expect to have that on, hopefully on press in the next year for sure.
Do you ever try to deal with gluten? Even though it doesn't affect many people, people try to avoid it.
Which, this is for Claudio, for the wheat?
Yes, for the wheat, yes.
Sorry, could you please repeat it, David?
Can you deal with the gluten problem?
Have you thought about reducing gluten in
We have some technologies that we have 3 nutritional products. Well, 2 nutritional, one is more of a commercial thing. One is reduced gluten. The other one is higher fiber. And the third one is stability, oxidative stability for the whole wheat bread in the shelves. So that we are developing those technologies also. I mean, wheat is a very interesting crop or sophisticated crop, and it will become more and more sophisticated when we can start working around these nutritional properties. And eventually, if it happens, and if we succeed with the drought tolerant wheat, we will have everything combined. So we'll see what happens.
Well, any other questions? I'm starting to finally run out of questions. Although, like I said in my my welcome talk long ago, it seems like a week ago actually already. I'm really sorry I'm not getting a chance to talk to you guys more extensively over coffee or some Mendoza wine or something like that, you know, because you've got a lot of interesting work that you guys are doing right now. You know, so everything from the nutritional issues to the mixes of environmental policies or policies for greenhouse gas reduction to these water issues. So keep up the good work. Come to our conference in person sometime if we ever get a chance. Our plan is to have it in Italy next year, and we'd love to hear the progress on your research then. And so thank you for coming, and I think we'll call this to a halt right now. Thanks.
Maybe we'll meet in Argentina in 2 years.
Yes, no, that's true. Argentina.
But we will meet in Mendoza, okay? Yeah. I want the wine. I don't want the wheat. I want the wine.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. That sounds good for me. Okay, thanks again.
Thanks.
Okay,
real pleasure.
Thank you.